Today we'll be looking at our newest product, which is the organic beef sirloin with chimichurri butter. We've opted for the sirloin for its Goldilocks features, which is fat ratio, tenderness, and flavor profile. We've paired it with the chimichurri butter, which is sometimes referred to as Argentine barbecue sauce because they use it on all their grilled meats to really enhance the flavor. We just launched this product this month, September 2022. You can find it down here at Shiralee in Brookvale or one of our network of resellers. So please get out there, give it a try, and let us know what you think. So let's get to it. Right, let's talk steaks. Now that you got your steak, key point I want to make is when you're going to cook your steak, you want to take your steak out of the fridge at least an hour before you cook. This is important because you want to take that chill off that steak. You can imagine it's been in the fridge. The center of that steak is going to be really cold. You're going to put it in a hot pan. You're going to get a beautiful caramelization on the outside, but that steak is still cold in the middle. So you're going to have problems with cooking internally. We will look at internal temperatures later in the video. But for now, big important step is take your steak out at least an hour before you start cooking. Get that up to room temperature, and that way you can ensure you're going to have an even cook when you chuck it in the pan. Another tip I suggest is when you pull out your steak to come up to room temperature, I would season it at that stage. What this does is it gives it time for that salt to penetrate that meat, so it's really well seasoned throughout the steak. The salt will also help dry out the outside of that steak, removing excess moisture and also dissolving the salt. So when that steak hits your pan, there won't be a barrier of salt and there'll be no moisture really on the outside of that steak. So that's really going to help you get that beautiful sear and that Maillard reaction, which translates to flavor. Right, so we'll season the steak now. There's no real trick to this other than sprinkling nice and even, I guess. Make sure you get all the corners, both ends and on the sides. Make sure it's nice even coat. This may vary a little bit depending on what salt you're using. We've got quite a fine salt here, so just be a little bit careful in that regard. Whereas flakier salt, tends to be not as intense. So our steak is now evenly coated with some salt. We're going to let that sit now for an hour, bring that up to room temperature, and then we'll see you in the next segment and we'll get cooking. So, this is what we've been waiting for, right? Time to cook these beautiful steaks. Not yet. First thing, we've got to get our pan nice and hot, right? So, get that on the stove. Depending if you're using non-stick or cast iron, I love cooking with cast irons. I've got these are great as well, non-stick pan. So you want this pan on a high heat. We want to get that nice and hot. So when our steak hits that pan, we can start that caramelization, and we also don't lose too much temperature in the pan. Generally, the stoves at home, they tend to lose a little bit of heat when you have, if you're cooking 1 or 2 steaks, not a problem. Also, another point, don't overcrowd your pan too much because you will lose temperature, and that's when you'll start to boil that steak, and that's never a good thing. Right. Also, I would like to talk about oil. I'm using a olive oil. You don't have to go, especially when you're cooking, don't waste on expensive extra virgin olive oils, but you do want to use a good quality oil as well. I'm using an olive oil, but with olive oil, it has a lower temperature point, so a smoking point. So you want to make sure that you are seasoning your steak with the oil. So what I'm doing when I mean that is I'm just applying a little bit of olive oil to the steak, not to the pan. So when that hits the pan, we'll still get that beautiful caramelization, but we're not going to be burning any oil and getting that nasty, burnt, carcinogenic kind of reaction going, if that's what we can say. So oil on the steak, not in the pan. Right, so this is what we've been waiting for, right? Cook these steaks. Not quite yet. First, we need to get our pan preheated. This is a very important step because we want that steak to have the best possible chance of getting all that flavor, right? We want that caramelization like we were talking about. We've got the salt now that's permeated that steak. We've taken away that moisture. And now we want to make sure we get the next step right, which is getting that pan nice and hot. Next, let's talk oil. You're going to need to use a bit of oil to cook the steak. That's going to help with the caramelization as well. But there's a couple of oils you can use. One of them I'm using now is olive oil. You can use a rapeseed oil or a neutral oil. But you've got a hot pan and oil, you can tend to burn that oil, which is then going to translate into the flavor of that steak. So you can spoil your beautiful steak by putting oil into a hot pan. So top tip, apply your oil to your steak. So what we're doing now is just drizzling a little bit of oil on both sides of the steak. And we're just going to brush that on the steak. That means we'll have minimum amount of oil going in the pan, but we still got oil that's going to help translate that heat to that steak, and we'll get that beautiful caramelization, which once again is flavor. Side note, you may want to invest in one of these. They're pretty inexpensive and you can pick them up at most supermarkets nowadays. It's a digital thermometer. These are great, especially when we're cooking our steak in the beginning. If this is all foreign, you know, a lot of us are not chefs. So grab yourself one of these and they are perfect. During the cooking, you can pull them out, stick it in the fattest part of your steak, and it will give you an internal temperature reading. And that will give you a really accurate reading of where you are and how your steak is doing. Obviously, temperatures will vary between medium and rare, and depending on how you like your steaks cooked. That's also, you can find all these internal temperatures online. Nowadays, it's super easy. So if you are feeling a little bit daunted by cooking a steak, I would suggest grabbing yourself one of those, and that'll make life super easy. So our steaks are seasoned. They've come up to room temperature. They've got the oil on them, and our pan is nice and hot. So it's time to cook our steaks. We're going to grab our steak, and we're looking for good sound, nice and hot. Give the steak a little bit of a pat. You don't want to push your meat because you don't want to push any kind of beautiful juices out of your steaks. You don't want to be squashing your steak, but I recommend just patting it down in the beginning. Sometimes the steak will not be flush on the pan, and that's when you'll get sort of gray areas. This way you're ensuring that that steak is making contact with the entire surface of that pan, and we're really making sure we're getting that caramelization. Once we've done this, I normally give it 2 to 3 minutes on one side. Don't move your steak around too much. There is, you know, everyone's got their own way of cooking a steak, flipping it back and forth. But generally, I would say 2 to 3 minutes on one side. We'll flip it over, and then we'll make sure we're getting that fat rendered as well. Right, so we're ready to flip. Flip the steak over. Oh, there we go. So we've got that beautiful caramelization going on there, and that's once again translates to flavor. So that's what we're looking for. Other side, and we can see that fat starting to render down, so that's what we love. You can see in the pan there, we haven't put any oil on there except the one we put on the steak, but you can see the fat coming out of that, which is obviously going to help us move along in terms of cooking, but flavor as well. Also, don't forget about the rest of your steak, all the sides. So flip up your steak onto that fat end. If you can prop it up against the side, do that. Otherwise, just hold it up there. You want to start rendering all that fat out, crisp it up, and that's going to obviously be the most delicious part as far as I'm concerned. Okay, so the steak is ready to come out. Chimichurri butter. Now, there's a couple of ways you can go about this. The application I'll be using today is I'm going to just get the butter on the steak and rest it. So that heat from the steak is going to help melt that butter, and it's going to rest. The steak's going to rest, the butter's going to melt over that, and for me, that's the way I really enjoy it. But there's so many ways. You know, we've created this product for your convenience, but you know, you create whatever you want really when you're at home. So for me, we're using a little bit of that heat now, so I'm going to get it on the steak now in the pan, and that's going to help that butter, just aiding it to start the melting. But get a piece of ciabatta, spread this butter on a ciabatta, slice up your steak, make yourself caramelized onions, and you have the best steak sandwich in town. You can throw it in the pan now, use it to baste your steak, classic style, but obviously be careful because, you know, the chimichurri, there is parsley and things in the butter that can burn. So just be wary that your pan is not too hot at that stage. But for me, as you can see, we're just going to get that on top of the steak, move it around a little bit, and then grab yourself a piece of foil, cover it up, and just leave that 5 to 10 minutes just to rest. All those juices are going to return to their natural place in that steak. The butter's going to melt, coat that steak, and it's going to be a great time. And then we'll cut it up. See you soon. Right, so, oh, look at that. We're ready to go. So you can see on the board there's a lot of butter and juices from the steak. Keep that. That is all flavor, right? We want that. So get yourself a nice sharp knife. That's also key. Sharp knife. And we're looking at the steak and we're trying to find the grain, right? You may have heard this before, cutting against the grain. This is important. This is not just a chefy thing. You'll have the grains of the meat. They'll be running lengthways in this particular cut. I mean, you know, you have to find the grain on, depending on the cut of meat you have. But you want to find that grain and you want to cut against that grain. So what they're going to do is it's going to cut through that grain and you're going to create a tender piece of meat. If you cut with that grain, you're going to have long stringy bits, and that's when you're going to find, oh, this, you know, poor quality steak. It's not. It's you've cut with the grain and not against the grain. So make sure you're cutting against the grain. That is very important. You've come all this way. You know, don't fall at the final hurdle. And obviously you can cut your steak as you like. I'm just going to slice it against the grain all the way down. Have a quick little peek here. Oh, yeah, we're happy with that. Right, pop that up. We'll get it onto our plate. I'm going to just fan that out a bit so you can see that. And like I said, make sure you're getting all this goodness on top of your steak. Do not waste a single drop. Trust me. Righty. There you have it. Now, you can, the butter is there, you got everything. You can drizzle it a little bit more olive oil, a little pinch of salt just to finish it off if you want to get a little fancy. But trust me, you can't go wrong with a bit of sirloin steak with chimichurri butter. Moment of truth. That is so juicy, tender, and the best part is like that butter just complements that steak. It doesn't overpower it. You taste the quality in that meat, and then you've got this beautiful punch of flavor. Guys, give it a go. Come down here and see us. Grab yourself a steak or one of the nearest resellers and have fun. Enjoy.